Think about the last time a driver aggressively cut you off in traffic. In that split second, as you slammed on your brakes, you probably decided that driver was, a selfish, arrogant, generally terrible human being.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. But what if I told you your brain just committed a massive, predictable cognitive glitch? A glitch so powerful that it doesn't just ruin your morning commute, it actually, well, it shapes our entire society.
Okay, that is a pretty bold claim. But as someone who frequently yells at other cars, I am definitely willing to hear you out on this.
I figured you would be. So to really unpack this, we're trying a specific dynamic for this deep dive.
Mm.
I'm going to put on my lecturer hat to guide us through the actual mechanics of how we perceive each other.
And I will gladly step into the role of the student. My job is to, probe the material, maybe challenge some of these theories, and just pull out the practical takeaways so we aren't just swimming in academic jargon.
Exactly. So class is in session. Our foundational material today comes from section 12.1 of chapter 12 from Psychology 2E. The main focus here is social psychology.
Okay, got it.
And if you break it down, social psychology is essentially the study of how people affect one another. And it operates on two distinct levels. You have the intrapersonal level, which is the stuff happening inside your own head, like your emotions, your attitudes, your self-perception.
Right, so the internal world.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Then you have the interpersonal level, which looks outward at how we interact in dyads and groups. So that deals with things like helping behavior, prejudice, and attraction.
Okay, so we're looking at the individual in total isolation and then watching what happens when that individual inevitably, collides with the rest of humanity.
That collision is exactly where things get messy. And right at the core of social psychology is this foundational debate about human behavior. It's the tension between situationism and dispositionism.
Okay, those are some heavy terms. Let's define those.
Right. So situationism argues that our behavior is determined by our immediate environment. The context we find ourselves in dictates what we do. Dispositionism, on the other hand, argues the exact opposite, that our behavior is driven by internal factors. So your personality traits, your genetics, your temperament.
I feel like we see this debate everywhere, honestly. It's the classic, outside forces versus inside forces.
Yeah.
Like nature versus nurture adjacent.
Yes, very similar. Here's a helpful way to visualize it. Think of human behavior like a plant. Your disposition, your internal traits, that is the seed. It has a very specific genetic code.
Okay.
But the situation, the environment is the soil, the rainfall, the amount of sunlight. Modern social personality psychology tells us you absolutely cannot understand how a plant grows by only looking at the seed. You have to evaluate the soil.
Well, let me put my student hat to work and just challenge that immediately. Because evaluating both the seed and the soil sounds, perfectly rational in a controlled laboratory setting.
Right.
But out in the wild, human beings are rarely perfectly rational. If I'm stressed and moving fast, I highly doubt I'm stopping to run a complex analysis of someone's environmental soil before I judge them.
Your intuition is spot on. We almost never do the math. We actually have a fundamental flaw in our cognitive processing, and researchers call it the fundamental attribution error.
The fundamental attribution error.
Okay, yeah. In many Western societies, specifically the United States, our brains are notoriously lazy. Processing the complex nuances of someone's environment takes a lot of mental bandwidth and calories. So to save energy, we default heavily to dispositionism.
Oh, wow. So we just skipped the hard part.
Exactly. We look at a stranger's behavior, assume it reflects a permanent internal trait, and completely ignore the context of their situation.
We skip the soil entirely because staring at the seed is just, it's easier and faster.
It is. There is a great scenario in section 12.1 that illustrates the everyday impact of this. Imagine Jamie comes home from work. Jamie's spouse, Morgan, opens the front door, smiles, and says, "Hey, how was your day?"
Okay, to normal evening.
Right. But Jamie instantly glares at Morgan and yells, "Leave me alone." If you are a bystander witnessing this, and your brain takes that lazy cognitive shortcut we just talked about, how do you categorize Jamie?
Well, my immediate gut level read is that Jamie is a hostile, aggressive person. I'm assigning a permanent personality trait based on a 5-second interaction.
Now, what if you later find out that Jamie's company had massive layoffs that morning, and Jamie was one of the people who just lost their job?
Oh, well, the entire narrative flips. Jamie isn't inherently toxic. Jamie is just experiencing one of the worst days of their life. The behavior is driven by a temporary, devastating circumstance. So it's a state, not a trait.
Exactly. The fundamental attribution error is the fact that our brains habitually skip past the possibility of that bad day. We jump straight to Jamie's a jerk.
But wait, if we are supposedly so bad at judging context, how powerful is this error really? Because in a passing glance, sure, I might assume the worst. But if we are actually engaged in a task with someone, and we know the rules of engagement, surely we course correct, right? We realize the situation matters.
You would think so, but no. A classic experiment known as the Quizmaster study proves just how blinding this error can be. Researchers took student participants and randomly assigned them to one of two roles: a questioner, the quizmaster, or a contestant in a trivia game.
The random assignment feels like the crucial variable here. Nobody earned their spot based on intellect.
Keep that in mind. The researchers told the questioners to write down difficult trivia questions using their own personal, obscure areas of knowledge.
Oh no.
Yeah. Then they presented these hyper-specific questions to the contestants. Unsurprisingly, the contestants bombed. They only got about 4 out of 10 correct.
Well, yeah, because the game is rigged. If I get to write a trivia quiz based entirely on my niche hobbies, of course a random person is going to fail. The situational advantage is astronomical.
Yet, look at what happened when researchers asked everyone to rate the general intelligence of both players after the game. The questioners were fairly grounded. They recognized their situational advantage.
Right, they knew they made the test.
But the contestants, despite knowing the roles were random and despite watching the questioner write the questions from their own niche interests, the contestants rated the questioner's general intelligence as significantly higher than their own.
That is baffling. I mean, the contestants knew the soil was rigged, they watched the soil being rigged, and they still concluded, wow, this person simply has superior seed. They are inherently smarter than me.
It gets wilder. Observers were also watching the game unfold from the sidelines. They knew the rules too. And the observers also rated the questioner as having vastly more general knowledge.
You're kidding.
No! The urge to assign an internal trait to someone in a position of authority or success is so overwhelming that it overrides glaring, objective evidence of a situational advantage.
If I'm already blindly assigning intelligence to this quizmaster just because they happen to hold the answer key, it seems like that could, snowball. Like if I assume they are highly intelligent, I might also start assuming they are a hard worker or a reliable friend or a morally upstanding person.
That snowballing effect is a documented phenomenon. It's called the halo effect. When our overall impression of an individual is positive in one area, we let it cast a halo over our judgment of their other character traits.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and physical attractiveness is the most common trigger. If someone is conventionally attractive, our brains lazily assume they must also be kind, competent, and trustworthy. We take one visible trait and let it artificially illuminate everything else.
I have a hard time believing every single human brain on Earth is just biologically hardwired to be this terrible at reading context. Like, if this fundamental attribution error is essentially a failure to see the big picture, is it a universal flaw in human DNA, or is it a product of our environment?
That distinction changes everything, and researchers have found it is absolutely not universal. The severity of this glitch is heavily programmed by culture.
Wait, really?
Culture!
Yeah. People from individualistic cultures have a notoriously high tendency to commit the fundamental attribution error.
And by individualistic, we're talking about societies that prioritize personal autonomy over group cohesion, right?
Exactly. Primarily Western countries like the US, Canada, the UK. These cultures train people from birth in analytic thinking. You are taught to focus on the individual as a standalone entity, the hero of their own story. So a person's disposition is naturally seen as the prime mover of their behavior.
Okay, and what's the alternative?
The alternative is a collectivistic culture found heavily in East Asian, Latin American, and African countries. These cultures prioritize communal relationships, family bonds, and group harmony. They train people in holistic thinking. Okay, that makes sense. Because if your cultural survival depends on group harmony, you can't afford to just look at a single person in a vacuum. You are constantly scanning the environment to see how people are reacting to each other. You are basically trained to evaluate the soil.
That's a great way to put it. A brilliant visual analogy for this is a stage. Individualistic cultures view a person like a solo performer on an empty, dark stage with a single spotlight. If a wrong note is played, it is entirely the soloist's fault.
In collectivistic cultures,
They view people as part of a massive symphony orchestra. The surrounding music, the conductor, the acoustics of the room, it all matters just as much as the individual instrument.
how do researchers actually test that difference in perception, though? It sounds a bit abstract.
They tested it through a fascinating study by Masuda and Nisbet using visual stimuli. They showed participants animated scenes like an underwater aquarium full of fish, rocks, and moving seaweed. Later, they tested their recall of the specific focal objects, the fish. Japanese participants, representing a collectivistic background, were highly accurate at recognizing the fish if they were presented in the exact same background context. But the moment researchers changed the background, their recall plummeted.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they had encoded the fish and its environment as one inseparable unit.
They literally couldn't separate the object from its content.
Right. But for the American participants, changing the background context had virtually no impact on their memory. They had completely isolated the focal object from its environment. They just saw a fish.
That is wild.
And this bleeds into the corporate world, too. There's a study by Ramesh and Gelfand looking at job turnover. In an Indian sample, which leans collectivistic, the primary predictor of an employee quitting was how well they fit with the broader organizational culture. The whole ecosystem mattered.
And in the U.S.
In the American sample, turnover was mostly predicted by how well the person fit their specific, isolated job duties.
Okay, but wait. Let me push back on this. If my individualistic Western brain is supposedly wired to always blame the seed, to judge the internal traits, why do I constantly find myself blaming the soil when I'm the one making a mistake?
Oh, this is good.
Right. Like, if a stranger yells in traffic, I think they are a monster. But if I yell in traffic, I don't think I'm chronically aggressive. I think I had terrible sleep, I have a migraine, and that guy cut me off. I'm suddenly the biggest champion of situational context.
You've just stumbled onto the actor-observer bias. We are staggering hypocrites. When we are the observer, we commit the fundamental attribution error. But when we are the actor performing the behavior, we abruptly shift our perspective and blame situational forces.
Why the double standard, though? Why does the brain expend the calories to look at the situation only when it's me in the driver's seat?
It comes down to a massive asymmetry in data. Think of your own life as a 247 intimately detailed documentary film. You have full access to your backstory. You know your stress levels, your past trauma, what you ate for breakfast.
Right, I have all the behind-the-scenes footage.
Exactly. You have all the situational data, so you use it to explain your actions. But when you look at a stranger, you don't have a documentary. You just have a 5-second GIF of them doing something annoying. Without the backstory, your brain fills in the blank with a personality trait.
The textbook actually mentions a fascinating study about relationships that captures this data asymmetry perfectly.
Oh, the girlfriend study, yes. Researchers asked male participants to write down the reasons why they like their own girlfriend. Overwhelmingly, the men listed internal dispositional qualities of the women, saying things like, she has a wonderful sense of humor, or she is incredibly kind.
They focused outward on the situation or the object of their affection. They rarely said, I have an insecure attachment style and need companionship.
Precisely. But then the researchers flipped the script. They asked those exact same men to guess why a friend liked his girlfriend.
And suddenly the explanations became deeply dispositional about the friend himself, didn't they?
Yeah. They did. As observers, they shifted the cause back onto the internal traits of the person they were evaluating. They lacked the intimate emotional data of the friend's relationship, so they judged the friend's traits.
Okay, I will happily admit that I use situational data to excuse my bad behavior.
Yeah.
I blame traffic when I'm late. I blame my lack of sleep when I'm grumpy. But if I give a killer presentation at work and get a promotion, I am definitely not crediting the room temperature or the fact that my boss was in a generous mood.
Nope.
I'm taking the credit. So does the actor-observer bias just vanish when we succeed?
It doesn't vanish, it mutates. It mutates into the self-serving bias. This is our incredibly convenient tendency to explain our successes as a result of our internal brilliant traits, while aggressively blaming our failures on external situational factors.
It's pure ego protection.
Complete ego protection. Mechanics-wise, the brain pulls 3 different levers to protect your self-esteem, which the textbook calls the dimensions of attribution. First is locus of control. So, is the cause internal to you or external? Second is stability. Is this a permanent, stable circumstance, or is it unstable and likely to change? And third is controllability. Could you control this outcome, or is it totally out of your hands?
Sports fans are the absolute perfect laboratory for this. Let's walk through those levers. If my favorite basketball team wins the championship, my brain wants to protect the ego of my group identity. So I pull the levers to make it internal, stable, and controllable.
Right.
I'd say Our players are inherently talented, they consistently practice harder than anyone else, and our coach runs an unbeatable strategy. We won because of our phenomenal seed.
And when your team loses in the first round of the playoffs next year?
Oh, total reversal.
Right.
Becomes external, unstable, and uncontrollable. I'd complain that the referees had a ridiculous vendetta against us. We had to play an unfair back-to-back schedule in different time zones, and the other team just got a few lucky bounces that we couldn't do anything about. We completely manipulate reality to ensure our identity remains pristine.
Deflecting blame to protect your ego after a basketball game is harmless enough, but if we scale this deeply ingrained psychological habit up to a macro level, things get significantly darker.
How so?
If we are desperately motivated to find internal, controllable reasons for success, and we default to judging the disposition of strangers, how does that shape our view of societal tragedy?
Well, if I'm following the logic, if my brain refuses to accept that bad things can happen for random, uncontrollable reasons, then I have to find a way to blame the people experiencing the tragedy.
Which brings us to the just world hypothesis. This is a pervasive ideology, particularly dominant in Western cultures, built on the belief that people get the outcomes they deserve in life. The underlying psychological drive here is the terror of an unpredictable universe.
That makes an unsettling amount of sense.
Because if you admit that a person can do everything right and still lose their home to a random economic recession, you have to admit that you're also vulnerable to random disaster.
The brain can't tolerate that level of existential threat. It's terrifying to accept that the soil might just turn toxic one day, regardless of how strong your seed is.
So, as a defense mechanism to maintain the illusion of safety and predictability, we convince ourselves that the world is inherently fair. Good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. If you want a good life, you just work hard.
But the shadow side of needing the world to be fair means you inevitably end up engaging in victim blaming.
That is the direct consequence outlined in the research. Because people with strong just world beliefs heavily favor dispositional explanations, they assume those experiencing misfortune are personally responsible for their fate.
Even when it's clearly out of their control.
Yes. They might look at individuals living in poverty and conclude they just don't want to work hard. That internal explanation allows the observer to feel safe, completely ignoring systemic situational factors like generational wealth gaps, poor educational infrastructure, or regional unemployment rates.
It's the fundamental attribution error weaponized on a societal scale to soothe our own anxiety.
Section 12.1 notes that this worldview leads to demonstrably negative attitudes toward the unemployed and marginalized groups like those living with AIDS. It also frequently results in victims of sexual assault being blamed for their abuse.
That's incredibly heavy.
It is. The urge to find a behavioral reason for a tragedy, like asking what the victim wore or why they were walking in a certain area, is a desperate attempt to believe the world isn't random. The text points out that this dispositional bias is so aggressively entrenched in our culture that advocacy groups like DUVI, which stands for Domestic Violence Ended, specifically attend court proceedings to provide support and ensure that the blame remains focused on the perpetrators rather than shifting on to the victims.
Wow. That takes us entirely out of the realm of textbook theory. We're talking about how these cognitive shortcuts dictate how justice is administered and who gets compassion in our society versus who gets condemned.
That is precisely why understanding social psychology is so critical. We can't fix the glitches in our societal code until we understand the glitches in our own cognitive wiring.
All right. Well, as the designated student, let me synthesize the curriculum today.
Go for it.
We started by identifying a massive blind spot, the fundamental attribution error, where our lazy brains judge strangers purely on perceived personality flaws, because analyzing their situation takes too much energy. We learned that Western individualistic cultures exacerbate this blind spot compared to collectivistic ones.
That's spot on.
Then we explore the hypocrisy of the actor-observer bias and the self-serving bias, how we hoard all the situational excuses for our own failures to protect our egos. And finally, we saw how that desperate need for ego protection and predictability scales up into the just world hypothesis, causing us to victim blame simply because we are terrified of a random, unfair universe.
I couldn't have synthesized it better myself. Consider the lecture officially concluded, and you definitely get top marks for today.
Thank you. Taking my student hat off, I have to admit, it's really unsettling to realize how much of my daily judgment is just my brain running an outdated, energy-saving program. It gives me a completely different lens to view my own reactions.
I am taking off the lecture hat as well. The mechanics of the mind are heavy, but awareness is really the only way to short-circuit the programming. So, we want to leave you with a final thought to carry into the rest of your week.
Yeah.
We've just spent this time unpacking how deeply our brains are wired to misinterpret the actions of others just to keep our own worldviews safe. Knowing the mechanics of that glitch, how might it change the way you react tomorrow? Think about the very next stranger who cuts you off in traffic or the colleague who completely drops the ball on a major project. Before you judge their seed, will you remember to check the soil?